All right, hey everyone. Today we are going to really quickly go over all of the brushes in my newest brush pack, ErgoRedux. It's called ErgoRedux because means to be reborn or renewed, and that's exactly how I feel at the time of creating this brush set. I feel like my approach to art and everything has just been revamped. So let's get right into it so that this doesn't end up taking too long, because I can spend some time on these. So I'm going to use a couple illustrations that I've already been working on to illustrate and to show you how to best use these brushes. So the first one is Magic Shader Color. So this is basically just a brush that is used to fill in and shade, but it has a color jitter to it so that you can get some color variations. Something that is really important if you want to make your artwork look realistic is you want to add fidelity. Fidelity means subtle changes and variations and things. So if you have ever played a video game and it was a really old video game, you might notice where the texture repeats, right? And it ruins the idea, the feeling of realism, because you can tell. Whereas when you can't tell when it repeats, it looks more realistic, right? It's the same concept here. You want tons of different colors and shifts happening everywhere in your illustration, but you don't want it to be so much so that, it makes it terrible. So I found a really good amount to where you can see all these little nice color variations here, but it's still very much unique and interesting to look at, even though it's still a very obvious specific shade. And it has a texture to it so that if you want, you can apply it lightly like that. And if you zoom in right there, you can see all of those different perforations from which you can now begin to take another color and then lightly go on top of that. That is a very messy looking color right there. And then do this, right? And then you can start to easily build up tone and value. So the next brush is the Rake Shader. So this is one of my favorites. You see me using it a lot. After I've done a lot of work with that brush, if I want to use any certain region to try to, not use a region, but create, or if I see a region that kind of needs to blend into the next one, I will use this brush to help me do that. So for example, what's a good place to do that, to demonstrate that here? You can see how I've used it to kind of curve around the different forms of the face. But one thing we can try here is to take this color, and you can kind of see it kind of stops right there. But if I wanted to bring it up the nose, I could just kind of pull it up like this. And this rake brush has different size little pieces to it. You can see that right there. And it also has a texture applied so that it helps with that texture variation again. So you're getting these really unique lines, and it doesn't look too digital, right? It still has a little bit of fidelity again to it, right? Those little areas where it's not as bright or it's kind of rougher, it really, really helps to add detail. You can use it in hair like I am, but use it creatively. This looks a little bit too consistent here. So a big thing that I do with this brush set is I use the brushes as erasers. So before we even talk about it, let's go ahead and use this halftone M brush. I see that kind of made this more boring than it used to be, right? So if I hide this, it looks it looked better the other way. But that's fine, because what we can do is say, okay, I want best of both worlds. I'm going to just use this brush to erase some of it, but leave the rest there. And so this could be a particularly interesting moment here where you begin to kind of play with how these different brushes look erased or using them to paint directly on. This video is honestly like a tutorial on how to paint at the same time. So the next brush is the same thing, it's just the rake brush without any textures. And whoa, I still have some variation there because I don't want it to be all straight and all the same size, but as you can see, it still does look that way. And I use this for the more graphic drawings, or when I'm trying to work on the base foundation of an illustration and I want to just quickly get values somewhere, like if I was painting this when I was just starting out with it. So I did not plan this, but let's see if this will work. So this was the older version of this painting, right? And when I was starting out, you can see those bigger areas. And if I want to continue to just kind of test some things and look at how I want to mess with things and try to introduce the idea of, to suggest that, okay, I want some like lighter color braids here when I come back for the detailing, I'll use this type of brush for that, right? And you can see it very easily gives you a hint of like something later, so you can use it to slowly start to refine more and more and more the different things that you plan to add at a later point in your illustration. So I'm going to bring the main thing back and get back on our demo layer, and let's rename it to demo. All right, so next up we have uniform glaze. Now this one is a fun one. I'm going to go ahead and take a light colored brush, and so sometimes what you want to do is you want to lighten an area, but you don't want to struggle with the brush settings, right? So I have this brush, you can barely see it, uniform glaze. What it does is it's very limited in its opacity, but I use it when I need to make an area overall slightly lighter or slightly darker. And it's quite smooth, but it still has some variation and subtlety to it. So if let's take a dark color so you can see exactly what it's doing, and use it over here. You see that? So if you don't pick it up, it stays at that opacity, which is really useful, right? And then when you pick it up and you do it again, it starts to act like a marker and it gets a little bit darker. That rhymed. So as you can see here, if I hide this layer, you can see it did make it a little bit brighter. What I can come back and do again with the eraser is add this really cool effect where I come back with this halftone brush, and watch this. We can begin to erase certain areas, which give you this really nice, cool effect of there being a layer beneath, and it helps bridge the different values and colors even more. So this looks even more so like it belongs with the rest, just because there's this light layer on top, and then I'm erasing it really subtly with another brush. And so you can use this, you could even use this to suggest freckles if you want, like some really cool subsurface freckles on her skin. It's a really cool way to use this brush. The next one is Bright Starfield, but I'm going to skip that one because it's generated from the main Starfield brush. So this brush, it just is a typical scatter brush with very light amount of color variation, but I like it because it has that really cool bokeh effect. Some of the circles have little edges on them sometimes, and you see it has this really nice just variation of opaque, translucent, small, big, little dots there. And I use this to shade in areas again when I'm blocking in things and I just want to start coloring but not using a brush, so that I'm allowing the brushes to give me room for happy accidents later on. So this is why I like brushes like this when I'm starting out. But then when sometimes I want to refine something but I don't want it to be super obvious, I just want to subtly hint or darken an area, I'll take like a color like this and then come back over here, and you can see I can just kind of darken a certain area, make the brush smaller, and add a lot of noise and fidelity to this without, making it look like super intentional, like how the hell did you paint all this, right? But it's you'll just be using brushes like this, and then you zoom in and have that effect, but all you really wanted to do is just darken that area. And it just makes doing one thing, it makes you accomplish multiple things with every stroke. So the next brush is the color version of this brush. So this brush just has a big amount of color variation to it, like this. And so I like to use this brush when I'm trying to create effects, like you saw me in the main video, where I use this brush here, right? Let's undo that and let's do another layer, but let's set it to add, and we can do that, and you see it's really bright, right? And it has these really cool effects that way. Now Bright Starfield is one where I really went in there and went crazy with the settings, and it's even more randomized, but the pieces are much smaller and they have all kinds of little imperfections in them. So I'm going to go back to the demo layer, and you can see like I'm using this like really dark purple, but we're getting all kinds of little random colors in there, right? And so this looks really good in areas where you're trying to create just little glitter effects or little sparkles, right? It's very, very subtle. You see that? It's very subtle, but it adds such a nice quality to it. So it's not nearly as intense as a lot of other sparkle or glitter brushes out there, even my own. It's very, very subtle. You can use it for dust, you can use it for makeup, all sorts of different things, and combine it with the other brushes to create the galaxy effect I did in the video. The next brush is going to be, or the next set of brushes is going to be the halftone brushes. So these were adapted from a Procreate brush, and I call them halftone SM and L for small, medium, and large. So I love halftone small because it just gives you a very consistent halftone pattern, right? But the dots are very far away from each other, right? So if I increase the brush size, you get big dots that are far away from each other. If I make the brush size really small, let's go onto this layer again. You can see the dots are small, but they're still far away from each other. So this can be incredibly useful for brightening areas where you don't want to just paint all over it. You still want to have what's below it showing. So you can see that here. This really nice peach color is still there, but I wanted the highlight to be there as well. So you can see here, I can use it like this, right? And brighten this area. And as you can see, every time I pick up the brush, it's offset a little bit, which is something I like because then it gives you more variation. Then if it's too much, you can come back with the same eraser if you want, or the same brush as an eraser, and begin to just work this way and just start to fade it out perfectly so that it looks exactly how you want when you zoom out to the scale that it's intended to be viewed at. So that's really, really powerful. The medium version is just the brushes are even closer together, so I use this one a lot. And the large one is where the dots are very, very close together. I don't use this one much. I kind of use it as a brush where I'm trying to fill in a certain area. If I want to like start over with this area, I would take this color and use this brush to kind of just paint over it so I can start over but still have some of the history showing beneath, because I think that's a big part of what makes traditional art so amazing and nice, having all of these things that show through just because of the nature of physical media. But in digital, you can actually replicate that and enjoy it. So why not? And so that's a big part of what I want to do with these brushes. This scatter build is very similar. I should have actually included it in this section, to the Starfield brush, but it's more so used for what I was mentioning before when you're trying to build up variations in tone. So I'm going to actually get out here and go to this illustration. I don't know why her face feels so dark. Something ain't right. There's a layer that should not be on, or a layer that should be on that isn't on. Oh well, we'll figure that out later. But to illustrate what I'm talking about here with this brush, this is how I built up these values for her skin earlier in the painting. I would take this brush, and it has a lot of color variation, and I would use it like this, right? You see how I'm getting that nice variation of color, and then I would come back with a more saturated color and then work it in that way. And you can see you eventually build up this very realistic, vibrant skin tone that has all sorts of colors in it. And from there, that's when I started to pick and choose different colors to really refine things further and start to melt away certain values and colors. So for these next set of 3 brushes, this is the brush you're going to see me using the most in my videos. These are glaze brushes, which is, again, the process of lightly working over and over and over until you get something that you want. So the light glaze is a brush with a very tiny, it's like 1% hue shift, but I just use this to build up the painting at its base. So I'll start from like there, and whoops, let's go back to the layer we created. And so I'll use this. You see it can be very light. It has a hard edge too, but it can be very light, but I can press down really hard, right? It has a hard edge because it makes it easier to work on your edge work. So I can softly fade the shadow even more so into her chest, but I can still come back here, shrink the brush size, press hard, and it has a nice sharp crease right there, right? You see that crease? I can come back with this and lightly add to that crease right there, right? So this think I really want the painting to have this there, but just to illustrate, you can see the difference of how I can make a crease and fade with the same brush. The next one is the one you see me use a lot too, which is the same thing, but it has color variation. So now I can come back here, shrink this brush size a bit, and it will add a little bit of color variation to it. And this is what I like to use more often than the other one, because you know me, I like color variation. So I want to get some orange in here, like there is up here, this little bit of orange. Make it a little bit darker, more saturated. I can begin to add just subtle hints of a color, of a new color in here. All right, it's a little bit too yellow for me. I can lightly add that in. And the best part about this is it also has texture just like the other brushes, just a very small amount of it though. Let me paint here. You can see right there when I let go, you can see it's got a lot of texture. And this is the same for the light glaze brush. This one has basically no color shift, but if you paint lightly, you get all that texture. But sometimes when you don't want it, you can go very hard. This one still has the texture show through though. You have to really get in there to make it opaque, which is by design. The next brush is one without any texture, and it's what I use when I want variation, but I'm painting in black and white. So sometimes I have set my iPad to where I triple press. It makes everything grayscale. Anyone can set this up on their iPad or their iPhone, and it's still in color. It's just showing in grayscale, but it's not really. You have to really be careful if you want to paint this way, color pick without really knowing what you're picking. So what I like to do is I'll have an actual grayscale drawing, and I'll use this brush when I want to start planning out the lighting and figuring out how I want this to look. Like, do I want the entire side of her face to be super dark, right? This brush allows me to play with the lighting scenarios and still have variation in the values. That way I can still have a lot of room for little happy accidents and fidelity that makes my artwork look even better. And you can see there I'm coming back with that small halftone, not really halftone, but it looks like halftone brush to kind of make some changes, and it looks good. It looks like it belongs there without me having to even blend, right? So these brushes are going to be great if you want to challenge yourself to blend less and try to understand colors and how they work and your values more. So let's go back to color, and then let's go hop on over back to this illustration, and let's look at the technical pen big and the monoline pen. These are again just slightly adapted versions of the original Procreate brushes. This is what I use for very fine line work, but it has a lot of pressure sensitivity for the size. So this is what I did to create this rough sketch where I wanted to test out, where is it? Here. This rough sketch where I wanted to test out some different lines or a different look for her face. So I use this one. I don't use it often. I usually use this for writing or sometimes to create those really bold like marks you see in her hair to make it look more graphic. The monoline brush pen is basically the same. It's just a small brush that is very, very small and doesn't have any pressure sensitivity for the size. So if I bring everything back, you can see little areas where I do use these brushes would be in little accents like this. These can add a lot to your illustration. I'm going to do some more colored versions of that, some highlights with this brush. You can use them for the eyelashes. I've got a lot of work to do for those. Or for like little things like this where you need a little shadow under here, right? Some areas you just need it to be, you need to get in there and paint a line or kind of force an edge. And then when you zoom out, it looks fine again. But like here, right, you can see I might want to come back and make that line darker so that when I zoom out, it looks how I want it to. Next one we have is the cover brush. So this is a brush for when I just want to paint straight, like I want to go, what do you call it? Windows paint Microsoft XP, Windows 97 type of mode, Windows 95, and just paint direct and cover a canvas or something 100%, not have to worry about any imperfections coming up. So it's a very basic brush. It's just, that's why it's called cover, when you just want to cover something. So this brush and this brush are connected, soft air and soft blend. So the soft blend is just your all-purpose blending airbrush, right? It has the tendency to want to blend, right? So I'm on a new layer, so it's not blending with what's there now. But if I come back with this green, you can see kind of starts pulling things along with it, right? Whereas now let's say I want to come back with a very light pink. You see, it took a while, right? Because it's kind of mixing those colors. Whereas if I use the soft air, it has no mixing set to it. If you want to just airbrush something in and do it on top of what's already there and lightly add it without mixing anything, that's the soft airbrush. So it's just a generic airbrush to just airbrush something in. I don't use it too often these days, but when you need it, you need it, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and delete that. And then let's go to these two brushes, basic brush, smooth, basic brush. So it's basically the same thing, your typical round brush that every artist tells you that that's all you need, with a little bit of fading at the end. This used to be how I would do my line work, and then I would come back and refine it like this. And so you'll see that the opacity changes a lot. It has a little bit of texture, but it's very subtle. It's very, it's not sharp texture, it's very blurred. And so I'll use it when I want to erase things. So like, let's say I want to erase this edge, or I want to paint in white to finalize the drawing. I'll use this type of brush because that's a very smooth effect to it. Or let's say right there, I want to kind of cheat. And let's say I want a dark kind of brownish color, and I want that part of her ear to really pop out. So I'm going to go over here and go to the reference, bring that here. And I want this part of her ear to pop out more at this top area. So I'm going to make that more of like a purple color and just kind of cheat in a little line here, right? And I can see, it's a little bit too obvious. So I can come back in and lightly just make generic fixes like this that will still come out looking natural. So that's how I use that brush. Or sometimes I'll use it like that, but it's pretty rare. It's just a generic all-purpose round brush. And then the smooth version is just one for when you want a lot of stabilization, because I hate going back and forth changing those settings. So I have a separate brush for when I need to make a smooth arc that I can fill in later or something like that. Or if I want to make this curve perfect, I'll come back with that kind of brush and then try to finesse it if I need to. So now we are on to these last three brushes, which are my main drawing brushes. So, but I don't always use them for that purpose. So sharp detail color. This is a brush that's similar to the previous one, but it has a lot of texture and it has a fine point to it. So I'll use this to add detail in areas where I don't want to brush with any effects. I just want to get in there and paint it myself. So if I want like some random dots here, I'll use a brush like this. And since it has color variation, it doesn't look out of place too quickly. Whereas if I've used color variation and textures everywhere and you add a random brush from another brush set that just has flat textures, no color variation, it will stand out. So that's where I use this type of brush, and sometimes I'll add little hairs with it like that. Sharp detail is just the same brush, but it's even sharper and it has more texture and it has no color variation to it. So this is a brush you will see when I want to really finesse the drawing component of my illustration. So I'm actually gonna try to look for an illustration where that shows better, because on those two it's not the best. Here's one that I haven't finished. Very few people have seen this. But if I want to work on this one, you'll see I did my sketch already, but if I want to make certain areas, let's make this, set this to multiply. If I want to make certain areas more obvious, right? I can come back in and say, I want this little corner of her nose to be darker to suggest that you can see the shadow of her nostril. That's where I'll use brushes like this. If I want her chin line to be really dark, come back in with this brush and darken it. Because it has a lot of texture, it doesn't look out of place. And so this brush, the Ergo Draw brush, it used to just be sharp detail, but this is the main drawing sketching brush that I use. So this is the brush I use to sketch all of this. It's the brush I use to draw most of the things you'll see in my illustrations, where I keep the line work in and then just finesse it later. So you can see I painted this, right? And the line work will stay, but I'll tweak the line work afterwards. But the main line work is always done with this Ergo Draw brush. It's just a flat pencil basically that has texture, but it has this nice like repeating pattern that goes this way, and it gives you that nice change in thickness that I think just makes all sketches look really, really cool. And I love the artists who do tend to have this quality in their lines. A great example would be, two great examples would be Pyro Daily, aka Hickam Hapchi, and TB Choi. I love how they draw, their drawings look before they even add colors for a lot of the characters that they work on. And so this brush is my attempt to kind of emulate that aesthetic. But that will be it. Yeah, I think this was pretty quick. That is an overview of this brush pack, ErgoRedux. It's what I used to complete both of these illustrations. Well, this one is a remake, but it's still, I used it everywhere. You see it in adding all of these different lines and dots to move the colors around the surface of the skin. You can see here, I use all of these dots a lot to give you an illusion of reflection going through the different streams of liquid pouring down on her body right there, to add that subtle hint of reflection from her skin without trying to force it. You just add in those dots, and when you zoom out, it looks great, right? That's how I use a lot of these brushes, and it's really, 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 really helpful. So thank you so much for checking it out. I hope this helped you, even if you haven't purchased the brushes. Drop some tips in there, and I will see you all in the next one. Take care and keep drawing. Peace.